My mom works in an office, so stories like this hit close to home. This is just content for views. It's based on real emotions, real mistakes, and things I've seen happen. If you ever felt pushed or out or ignored at work, I meant this for you. All names, places, and companies are fictional, but the lesson is real. Don't write people off too soon. You might not know who really owns the ground under your feet.
The memo wasn't printed on standard office paper. It was glossy, branded, full color header with Jordan's smug face in the corner like it was a startup pitch deck. Access Restructuring Initiative, elevating synergy through space optimization. Corporate poetry for we're about to screw with people who know more than we do. I'd been at that tower longer than he'd been alive, literally, and yet there it was, my name missing from the approved access list for the service floors. I scanned the QR code out of pure curiosity. The site redirected to a Notion board that wouldn't even load on company Wi Fi. Amateurs. I didn't throw a fit. I didn't even raise my voice. I just continued my walkthrough like I always had, checking the emergency generator vents along the west wall, noting a minor pooling issue near the back drainage slope, and flagging the chipped concrete edge at Dock 3. I'd built the specs for that entire flow system when they upgraded in 2011. The engineering team had called me the ghost in the blueprint back then. No one questioned how I knew every vent, valve, and voltage draw by heart. I simply did, because I didn't need a nameplate on a door to understand where the real power ran. If you're enjoying this story so far, take a second to like the video and subscribe. It's a small click for you, but it means everything to the team that brings these stories to life. Most people don't even realize how much it helps, so thank you. Upstairs, I passed the floor where they'd moved in the new blood. One desk had a neon sign that said, "Grind now, shine later," and a box of pre-workout packets sitting next to a fidget cube. Another had a poster of Elon Musk photoshopped as Iron Man. The air reeked of cologne, kombucha, and the kind of ambition that's never met a consequence. I didn't stop walking, just observed, noted the scratched-up trim along the hallway baseboards, the motion sensor in Conference B that had been blinking red for 2 weeks, the subtle dip in the floor tile that meant the subfloor panel had started to swell again. No one saw it. No one cared. But I did. I always had. Back at my desk, a corner unit tucked behind the records archive, I logged into the maintenance system like I always did on Tuesdays. Only this time, the screen blinked. Access denied, contact admin. My name wasn't in the system. I refreshed. Same result. Checked my credentials, same ID number I'd used since 2010. That's when I felt it. Not anger, not even surprise. Just that quiet click inside your chest when you realize the game's already in motion and someone thinks they're the only player. I opened my bottom drawer and pulled out a single sheet of paper, yellowed at the edges, laser printed in 2009 with my attorney's letterhead on top. Caslon Trust Property Agreement, Wexler Redevelopment Site. The original. Signed, notarized, buried behind corporate expansion layers so deep most people thought the land was owned by the tower itself. It wasn't. It never had been. They leased the building. I owned the dirt. Every square inch beneath their espresso bars, ping pong tables, and podcast rooms was mine. Jordan didn't know that, of course. He saw me as that woman in facilities because I didn't wear heels or host brainstorming lunches. I fixed things. Silently, permanently, and I'd kept it that way for over a decade, but something about that glossy little memo, the arrogance of it, shifted the balance. He didn't just trip a wire, he yanked the whole fuse. I folded the document back into its protective sleeve, slid it into my leather satchel, and stood up. Then I walked over to the window that overlooked the parking lot. It was a crisp morning, blue skies, light wind, not a cloud in sight. Perfect weather for demolition, not the loud, dramatic kind. The kind you never hear coming. The kind that starts with one quiet message. Trigger clause. And I knew exactly who to send it to. Jordan strutted toward my desk like he was walking onto a TED stage, collared shirt unbuttoned just enough to show off a fake tan and a gold chain that probably came from a mall kiosk. He had backup. 2 interns, both cradling iPads like shields, fingers poised for notes they'd never need to take. One of them looked like he was still trying to figure out how to hold eye contact. The other was already filming. Training documentation, no doubt. I didn't bother asking. Jordan cleared his throat, like he was about to drop a mic. "Pack your box, boomer," he said with a half laugh, like he expected applause. "We need fresh blood in here. No offense, but this floor's got legacy stink." I didn't blink. No HR, no written notice, not even the courtesy of a meeting invite, just vibes and a boy with an inflated title. He called himself Director of Ops and Strategic Transformation on LinkedIn. But the reality? He was a kid with a key card and too many buzzwords to fit into one sentence. He mistook my silence for fear. Rookie mistake. I stood. Not fast, not slow, just the same way you'd stand if you saw a storm rolling in over your land and knew exactly where your floodgates were. I turned to the window. Same view I'd looked at every morning for 14 years. North lot, city skyline, the old oak that somehow still held its ground by the loading dock. I traced the lines in the pavement with my eyes like they were old friends. "Understood," I said, soft as a closing drawer. Behind me, one intern shifted awkwardly. The other lowered his iPad. Then I pulled out my phone. No panic. No performance. I opened one contact. Just labeled Stone and Maynard LLP, my attorney's firm. The one that had been on retainer since the trust was formed in 2009. I typed 2 words. Trigger clause. Sent. That was it. Jordan turned to say something else, some final line he'd probably rehearsed in the mirror while adjusting his gelled hair, but I was already reaching for my coat. I didn't look at him. Didn't need to. My eyes drifted to the far wall of my office, the one he'd clearly never noticed. Right above the printer, next to the old filing cabinet that hadn't been touched since 2016, hung a framed black and white photo. At first glance, it looked like a vintage real estate development image, but if you read the plaque below, it said everything. Wexler Site Redevelopment in Trust, March 2009, Caslon Holdings. He never once asked what Caslon Holdings was, never Googled it, never asked why it was the only name on the original blueprint approvals. He thought this tower stood because his daddy's VC fund had cut a check. He never thought to ask who owned the ground beneath his recycled steel and ego. I took one last look around my space. Not with sentiment, but with precision. The bookshelf I installed myself. The patch in the ceiling I had reworked after a faulty conduit. The emergency light I rerouted during the blackout of 2012. It was all still mine, even if the paperwork didn't say so in bold. Ownership wasn't about titles. It was about leverage, about foresight, about playing long games that kids like Jordan couldn't even pronounce. "Do you want someone from facilities to help you carry your things?" he asked, trying to sound helpful now, like he'd just gifted me early retirement. I finally turned, just enough to meet his eyes. "I think you're going to need facilities more than I will," I said quietly. He furrowed his brow, unsure if it was a threat or advice. Then I walked out, left everything on the desk, left the chair turned slightly, left the blinds open. I passed the front security desk without a word. Jerry nodded at me. I nodded back. He didn't know the details, but he'd seen enough in his years to know when not to ask questions. By the time I reached my car, my lawyer had already replied, "Received. We're filing under Clause 7.4b at 11 a.m. I sat behind the wheel. Let the silence settle around me. No music, no talk radio. Just the quiet hum of a woman who's been underestimated for so long. People forget she helped build the very floor they're standing on. The prodigy had made his move. Now it was my turn. Jordan was mid-sentence when the deputy walked in. "And once we eliminate redundant legacy assets..." He froze, not because of the uniform, but because law walks differently than interns. There's no swagger, no hesitation, just that heavy, grounded authority that makes even the boldest fool feel the floor beneath him shift. The sheriff's deputy was calm, mid-50s, clip-on tie, polished boots, and a face like he'd seen every flavor of bad decision a man can make on a Tuesday. He held a sealed envelope and didn't bother asking for Jordan by name. He already knew who the loudest person in the room was. "Mr. Wexler," he said, "this is for you, and this building." Jordan took it with a confused laugh, as if Ashton Kutcher might pop out from behind a whiteboard yelling, "Punked!" He sliced the seal open with a pen cap and scanned the letter. His smile faded like cell reception in a parking garage. Clause 7.4b. It was right there in bold font, plain as a warning label on a bottle of bleach. In the event that the trust's on-site representative is removed from their position without prior consultation and documented board resolution, the trust reserves the right to revoke site occupancy with 30 days' notice, waiver rights reserved exclusively by truster. Translation: You fired the wrong person, and now you're trespassing. Jordan tried to stammer something about needing to consult legal. The deputy cut him off gently, like a surgeon ignoring a patient mid-surgery. This building is under temporary injunction pending review, he said, effective immediately. That includes operational freeze on all tenant access until further directive. One of the interns dropped his iPad. Someone in the back whispered, "Is this real?" It was. By 12:30, badge access across 5 floors was suspended. Conference rooms blinked dark. Emails bounced. Printers stopped mid-page. Only emergency lighting remained, and even that flickered like it knew something was dying. HR tried to bluff their way through it, claim it must have been a clerical mistake. But the deputy had backup now, a second envelope for the building manager, and this one was heavier. Legal filings, notarized exhibits, and the full trust deed appendices, which hadn't seen daylight since the Wexler Tower was first poured. My lawyer had filed it all within 50 minutes of my text. They didn't need to dig. The clause had been renewed annually, like clockwork, along with the property taxes I paid without fanfare. It sat in the same file drawer as the original building schematics, signed off fire safety codes, and the EPA drainage audit I personally reviewed in 2013 after the city installed those useless retention basins. Clause 7.4b wasn't a threat. It was a fuse, waiting for someone arrogant enough to light it. And Jordan, bless his disruptor heart, had struck the match with both hands. Downstairs, security started redirecting people out of the building. Vendors, account managers, junior associates with lunch still warm in their hands. Confused, blinking, dialing up floor leads who couldn't get past the front turnstiles. One of the new hires posted a video to TikTok. "Wexler Tower is shut down? What is happening, Dabag?" The caption had 3 crying emojis and a caption that read, "Bro, they locked the bathrooms." Jordan tried to make calls from his mobile hotspot. Legal, Dad. Probably some friend with a business degree and 0 real-world hours. But it didn't matter. The trigger clause had been filed, logged, and accepted by the county office. On record, time-stamped, and already stamped with the judge's signature. Occupancy was frozen. Utilities, under review, lease renewal, suspended. Upstairs in the file vault, yes, the actual physical vault, because some of us still believe in paper, my original trust agreement sat in a steel box. Number 271, same slot it had occupied for 14 years. No dust, no updates needed, just quietly waiting to be respected. Back in my home office, I poured myself coffee and flipped through a spreadsheet. One column showed projected vacancy estimates for tech corridors across the metro area. The next column, my redevelopment contacts. Jordan wanted modernization. He was about to learn what transformation really looked like, and it started with erasing his access, one clause at a time. By Friday morning, the Wexler Tower had started to hum wrong. It wasn't dramatic at first, just subtle. A flicker here, an unexpected reboot there. The security gate at the parking deck stalled mid-raise, forcing a line of Teslas to back up into the street. The elevators lagged, then reset entirely, trapping 3 people between floors until someone figured out how to manually override them from the service panel. The HVAC system started blowing cold into warm zones and warm into cold ones. On the 5th floor, someone joked it was like the building caught a virus. It had. And I was the carrier. What no one in Jordan's visionary ops crew understood, because they never bothered reading anything built before TikTok, is that during the 2011 renovation, the entire backbone of the building's infrastructure had been rewritten. A condition of the upgrade financing. My condition. Every system that connected to life safety, power, environmental control, and digital routing was tied, by contract and code, to landowner permissions. At the time, it was hailed as a forward-thinking partnership between tenant and trust. In practice, it made me the root admin of their entire operational nervous system. By noon, no one could badge into the server room. By 1:15, the conference rooms were dark. Automatic calendar displays blinked, "No connection." Smart glass panels stayed opaque, trapping the executives in boxy gray silence. The espresso bar stopped dispensing. Microwaves reset. Even the fridges in the tech hub began thawing their curated snack supply. An intern reportedly wept over melted protein pops. Jordan tried to hold a crisis meeting in his favorite war room, only to find the doors locked. Literally locked. The digital access panel blinked red, then dead. He called building services. No one answered. He sent 3 urgent Slack messages to a contact labeled Property Liaison. They bounced. Finally, someone from facilities, one of the few old-timers who hadn't been iced out yet, walked up quietly and said, "There is no more building services department. It was absorbed into Caslon Trust in 2020. Jordan blinked. What the hell is Caslon Trust? That was the moment it clicked. Not just for him, but for the floor leads, execs, and junior staff who had ridden the wave of tech arrogance without ever checking who held the shoreline. Caslon Trust wasn't a name, it was the foundation. And it was mine. By 3 p.m., IT flagged a strange report. The building's Wi-Fi network had changed. Gone was Wexler Secure 5G and Ops Net August. The new broadcast SSID appeared across all 5 floors simultaneously. Eviction mode R TrustNet. No password. Just open access to an HTML splash page that said, "Access to this facility is under review by Caslon Trust per Article 7.4b. All systems governed by Primary Infrastructure Agreement 2011 revision. Contact your legal team." No server, no redirect. Just that message. Plain, undeniable. Someone tried unplugging a panel in the data closet. It rebooted with the same message, now on a 60-second loop. People started leaving in clumps, confused, whispering. One team lead packed up his mechanical keyboard and just muttered, "I don't get paid enough for whatever this is." Jordan stayed. Of course he did. Pacing the floor, tie gone, hair mussed, still trying to act like the protagonist in a redemption arc no one wanted to watch. He tried calling my lawyer's office. They redirected him to the trust's inquiry portal. He tried filing a formal challenge with the county office. It had already been declined, 3 hours earlier. He tried rebooting the emergency power grid manually. That's when the lights went out completely. Back in my living room, I was watching a rerun of Columbo and sipping Earl Grey. My phone pinged with a security update. System lockdown complete. Phase 1 response executed. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. The storm wasn't coming. It was already inside, and the boy in charge just learned what happens when you fire the architect of your air supply. They met at 10 a.m. sharp that Saturday, desperate enough to forgo their usual Aspen cabins and golf brunches. Some dialed in from vacation homes. Others sat red-eyed in the Wexler Tower's now powerless executive lounge. The glass walls steamed over from lack of climate control. Bottled water, dead laptops, and the smell of panic in designer cologne. I wasn't invited. I didn't need to be. The meeting opened with finger-pointing. IT blamed facilities. Facilities blamed legacy infrastructure. Marketing muttered something about optics and brand narrative. And Jordan, sweating through a quarter zip that probably cost more than my entire filing cabinet, launched into a breathless explanation about transitional resistance from outdated stakeholders. He called me a squatter, a disgruntled retiree clinging to legacy rights like a barnacle on a sinking ship. That's when legal, finally looped in, cleared her throat. Deed back rider, page 38. Just like that. Quiet. Surgical. No raised voices. The room stilled. She clicked a file on her tablet and mirrored it to the main screen. There, scanned in high resolution and stamped with a county seal, was my signature. Alongside it, the original developers. 2 witnesses. A notary. Dated 2009. It wasn't a memo. It wasn't a favor. It was a legally binding clause buried inside the site's foundational agreements. One the board had ratified in a rush when they needed last-minute financing to complete construction. It read, in part, "In the event of unauthorized removal, exclusion, or reassignment of the trust's designated representative without formal consultation, the truster may, at their sole discretion, revoke site usage. No contestation clause applies. Reinstatement requires written consent of truster." In plainer English, they messed with the wrong woman, and I didn't need anyone's permission to pull the land out from under them. Jordan opened his mouth. Legal held up a hand. It's enforceable, it's live, and you activated it. Someone asked if there was a digital copy. She nodded. Yes, but we found the original this morning. She reached into her briefcase and set a thick sealed envelope on the table like a blackjack hand no one wanted to see flipped. Notarized, laminated, vault stored, been in the title room since the day the first tenant moved in. Jordan's voice cracked. Why didn't anyone flag this? A board member, one of the few who remembered the original deal, leaned forward and said, because no one ever expected you'd be dumb enough to trigger it. Silence followed. Thick, the kind of silence that makes men with titles wonder how long they've been living inside a paper throne. Someone muttered, "What happens now?" Legal responded without emotion. Technically, the building is in breach. Truster has full authority to reassign tenancy, reclaim infrastructure, or invoke redevelopment. Unless she waives the clause, this site is functionally in default. Jordan tried to deflect again, offering some line about positive intent and generational miscommunication. The board wasn't buying it. Not after watching the lights go out, the badge system fail, and their emails bounce into oblivion. Not after learning that everything they thought they controlled, heating, wiring, airflow, even building signage, was tied to agreements they never read. They ended the meeting without resolution. No plan, no vote, just a shared understanding that the ground beneath them had shifted, and the woman they had underestimated was already 10 steps ahead. I, meanwhile, was repotting my hydrangeas, not because I was indifferent, but because I'd already done the hard part. The deed-back clause wasn't a weapon. It was insurance, written in the ink of foresight, protected by time and immune to apology. Let them scramble. Let them debate. The only signature that mattered now was mine. The locksmith arrived before sunrise. Not one of those commercial chain vans with cartoon keys painted on the side. This guy wore a city-issued badge and had a silent, heavy step like he'd done this before. His toolbox hit the marble lobby floor with a sound that made 2 junior analysts drop their lattes. He didn't speak, just nodded at the sheriff, then knelt to begin removing the main cylinder lock from the executive entry doors. By 8:15 a.m., uniformed officers stood at every entrance. The notice had gone out at dawn. All non-residential tenants had 2 hours to retrieve personal items. Commercial property would remain sealed, cataloged, and subjected to arbitration pending formal eviction review. No exceptions. The copywriter in marketing cried quietly in the stairwell as she boxed up her framed quotes and desk cactus. One of the IT guys tried to sneak a full monitor under his coat until the officer shook his head once and pointed to the elevator. Jordan wasn't there. He hadn't shown up. But his office door, still locked and still powerless, sat with a bright red sticker across it. Access suspended per Article 7.4b. Revocation in progress. Upstairs, legal packed in silence. HR fielded desperate questions from staff trying to figure out where their payroll would be processed now. One woman muttered something about Cobra and then trailed off into silence as a locksmith passed her in the hallway. On the mezzanine level, the social media team tried to stage a goodbye selfie by the neon Wexler Rising sign. The power cut out halfway through. One of the senior VPs stood by the building's delivery dock, staring at the sun catching the edge of a branded delivery truck just arriving, scheduled weeks ago to bring in new standing desks and recycled wood acoustic panels. The driver stepped out, clipboard in hand, confused. "Wait, why are they moving out? I thought you guys just hit Series C?" The VP just stared. Then quietly, "We don't own the dirt." The driver blinked. "What?" "The land," he said, a little louder. "We leased the building, but the land, it was never ours." No one answered after that. Back across town, I was sitting at my usual diner. Corner booth, black coffee, 2 eggs over hard rye toast. I didn't check the newsfeed, I didn't refresh the filing dashboard. The deed was done, both legally and literally. My name sat on file in the county records, clear as sunrise. Caslin Trust, primary landholder, site usage under revocation. The waitress, Nancy, topped off my cup and smiled. "You look like someone who just won a long game." I gave her a small nod. "Just finishing one." On the sidewalk outside, 2 pigeons fought over a chunk of bagel. In a boardroom 6 miles away, a dozen executives were learning that brand loyalty, talent pipelines, and corporate vision mean very little when the land under your ping pong tables is no longer yours to stand on. At 10:07 a.m., the final buzzer sounded through Wexler Tower. Law enforcement swept the halls once. Then the locksmith re-engaged the cylinders, one by one. The glass doors closed, lights dimmed. A single sign remained taped to the lobby entrance, printed in plain Arial, black ink. Closed pending reassignment. Per Articles 7-9, Caslon Trust. No logos, no drama, just authority. They built their empire on someone else's foundation. And now they'd been reminded what happens when the ground decides it's done holding you up. They brought in a white shoe law firm by Tuesday. Baldwin and Kessler, big name, bigger invoices, the kind of firm with mahogany conference tables, in-house sommeliers, and more Ivy League degrees than common sense. They were flown in on a situation stabilization retainer, which is rich considering they didn't realize the situation had already stabilized, just not in the direction they wanted. The goal was simple: unravel the revocation, find a thread, a breach, a filing misstep, anything to call my clause into question and buy back leverage in the eyes of their board. But legal leverage doesn't come from volume, it comes from maintenance, and I maintained everything. They requested public records, only to find the trust was in perfect standing. Taxes filed every year, on time, no extensions. Permits updated and archived. Notarizations scanned, submitted, backed up threefold. The last renewal? Time-stamped 6 months ago with a city clerk's signature and 2 digital confirmations. They even pulled building code logs and couldn't find a single lapse in inspection or compliance going back to the day the slab was poured. That's the thing about being underestimated. No one thinks you're thorough. They assume you got lucky. They never imagine you have binders thicker than their case files and backup drives stored in a fireproof safe labeled redundancy. By Thursday, the tone shifted. No more smug emails, no more "we'll be in touch." Just quiet conference calls and a mounting pile of printouts that all ended the same way: Caslon Trust. Valid, enforceable, bulletproof. Some poor junior associate got the assignment of reviewing the physical deed book, housed in the same vault that Jordan never once bothered to visit. Between the last renewal tab and the contract summary sheet, they found something taped to the inside of the back cover. A letter, printed on thick linen paper, edges yellowed slightly with time. It was from the original developer, the man who'd almost lost the project in 2010 when his financing collapsed midway through excavation. I'd stepped in then, quietly. No headlines, no glory. Just structured support through a blind trust with conditions, oversight, and clauses tailored for longevity. The letter was brief. To the future holder of this site, never forget who stabilized your footing when the foundation cracked. W. Armitage, 2010. Pinned beneath it, a copy of the transfer log with my initials, small, neat, precise. Baldwin and Kessler didn't even try to refute it. Their lead counsel just filed an internal memo with 2 words in the subject line: irrevocable standing. The board stopped replying to Jordan's emails. His assistant? Gone. Resigned quietly, no farewell post. Just a final Slack message that read, "Hope you kept the receipt for your MBA." Jordan didn't log into LinkedIn for days. When he finally did, the only update was the removal of his job title. Open to work appeared in gray beneath his profile picture. He tried to call. Twice. I didn't answer. There wasn't anything left to discuss. The building was sealed, the clause enforced, the trust intact. The city already had 3 redevelopment inquiries logged for the space, each one tagged with my name as advisor of record. I hadn't announced anything, hadn't posted, hadn't tweeted. But in certain circles, silence is its own kind of thunder. No press conference, no gloating, just one woman, one trust, and a paper trail thicker than any legacy boy's resume. The wreckage he left behind was no longer mine to fix. It was his to live in. The call came on a Thursday afternoon, exactly 12 days after the locks were changed. I was in my garden, pruning the roses back before the first cold snap. The phone buzzed once in my jacket pocket. Unknown number, but the area code told me enough. I wiped my hands on a towel and answered without ceremony. "Hello? Ms. Wexler?" A man's voice, stiff with practiced concern. "This is Darren Langford, CEO of Wexler Systems. I. He paused like he was still deciding which version of himself to be. I believe we've had some unfortunate misunderstandings. I didn't interrupt, just let the wind speak into the silence. I didn't know the lease had this kind of language, he said finally, like a child confessing he forgot his homework existed. It always did, I replied. Calm, factual, not cruel. He sighed. I'm not here to justify what happened. I've spoken with legal. I understand the enforceability of the clause. He didn't say Jordan's name, probably still trying to figure out how to explain to investors that their young disruptor had disrupted himself straight into a commercial eviction. I just wondered, he continued, if you might be open to a restructured lease, different leadership, new firm name, separate entity. We're exploring options. I let a few seconds pass. Not on that site. He was quiet for a moment. I could hear the faint hum of fluorescent lights and maybe even a coffee machine behind him. Corporate limbo always sounds the same. Well, he cleared his throat. I understand, and I respect your position. I'm glad to hear that, I said. He hesitated again. We're operating out of a temporary location now, he offered, like a confession. Rented floor space, third-party facilities. It's not ideal. We're sharing walls with a call center that sells extended warranties. He laughed. A short, defeated sound. I let the image settle. Well, Darren, I said evenly, I do know someone developing a new tech hub near South Point. Better zoning, no legacy wiring, sustainable materials. They're looking for anchor tenants. He perked up. Really? That could be... They'd need a different pitch deck, a more humble one. Understood. And they'll want to see your internal governance plan, in full, before they sign anything. Of course. I'll make the introduction, I said, but only that. He nodded into the phone. I could hear it in his breath. Thank you, Ms. Wexler. I ended the call. Didn't save the number, didn't smile. Just knelt back down beside the rose bush and resumed clipping. The silence was comfortable again. Earned. Across town, Darren Langford prepared to pitch investors from a folding table in a converted mailroom with thin walls and a shared bathroom. He still had his business cards, still had a corporate email address. But he no longer had footing, because footing isn't an idea, it's a deed. And in his case, the deed no longer said Wexler, it said Caslon, which for people like him is the kind of detail they only notice once they're standing outside, trying to badge into a door that doesn't recognize them anymore. 3 months to the day, the tower came back online. No ribbon cutting, no overproduced launch event with drones and espresso carts. Just a clean install of new infrastructure, new tenants, and an entirely different energy. Literally. The space was leased to an energy tech firm focused on smart grids and resilient systems, quiet, competent, privately backed. The kind of people who read every clause before they sign. The kind of people who know what it means when a trust name shows up in the deed history 3 times across 2 decades. They didn't ask for naming rights, didn't ask to paint the lobby. They just signed, moved in, and began working. Efficient, grateful, intentional. The front signage was updated with a new plate. Brass, brushed, mounted flush with the limestone. Property managed by Caslon Trust, SD. 2009 site use, governed by Articles 7 to 9, term non-negotiable. The font wasn't flashy. It didn't need to be. It wasn't there to impress. It was there to remind. One of the new partners asked if I'd consider attending their winter gala as an honorary guest. I accepted. Out of curiosity more than vanity. The space had been transformed, walls reconfigured, floors stripped and redone in reclaimed oak, lighting replaced with warm LEDs that made the place feel more like a home than a monument to pitch decks. At the gala, the mayor gave a short, genial speech, spoke about innovation built on integrity and the evolution of our commercial community. Then she smiled, raised her glass, and said with a chuckle, "And let this be a reminder, don't cross the guy who owns the ground beneath your unicorn." The room laughed politely. A few heads turned toward me. I didn't speak, didn't correct her, just raised my glass slightly, took a sip, and let the silence say what needed saying. Afterward, as I stood by the east window, watching the city pulse in amber and blue beyond the glass, one of the younger board members approached. He asked quietly, How did you know to keep it all so airtight? I looked at him, not unkindly, and said, because when people stop looking at the foundation, that's when the cracks start forming. I just made sure mine never shifted. He nodded, slowly. You could see it landing. Later that night, as I gathered my coat and slipped out into the cold, I passed the plaque again. Its metal surface caught the light from the courtyard torches just enough to glow faintly. I didn't stop, didn't touch it. But as I walked away, I thought about all the times I'd been dismissed as background, facilities, admin, legacy asset. Thought about the boys in pressed shirts who thought leverage came from noise. It doesn't. Leverage isn't about volume, it's about foundation.